So I'm continuing work here on the 62 Vauxhall Victor FB. Disappointment, it was supposed to be my partner and myself's ride for the Great Beater Challenge. Unfortunately, didn't get it ready in time and missed the party. So let's go over and a couple things here, and we'll kind of cover what happened, and we'll see what's going on with the project moving forward. That was ultimately what did us in. Lack of front brakes. If anyone knows the Vauxhall Victor, this is a backing plate. They have, two wheel cylinders. Get my shade out of here. And no matter what we did, we could not get one of them to stop leaking on both sides. They would just continue to pour liquid out. The red paint is from something else. So I decided that we're going to change out the stock brakes. I got the rears taken care of. Brand new wheel cylinders. And I've taken out the original Vauxhall Victor brakes. And this is what I've replaced it with. This, if anyone can guess, is rear brakes from a 2000 to 2011 Ford Focus with rear drums. So kind of unusual, but with some work, some rework, and welding up of the backing plate holes. You'll see on here there's a pattern to match up. So literally, I took the Ford Focus backing plates, welded them up, and re-drilled them, cut out the center part, basically to fit the hub on the inside. I can sneak in the back here. The only downfall, though, is I had to cut the bleeder to fit around the spindle. But this is a brake line out of a Ford Focus 2012 and up. This is a front brake hose. And I've used a self-tapper in there. Thanks, Pole Barn Garage, for setting me onto them. And this thin brake line here could probably be bent to clear the spindle here, and then you could probably take the brake assembly and just clock it a little bit more upright, but it's off by a few degrees. I had to modify the Vauxhall Victor brake drums. You'll see this here. If you know the Ford Focus, it's a hub and brake assembly kind of pressed together, but I wanted to keep the wheel holes the same. I wanted to keep the center board the same. And I had to slightly modify both of them, as you can see here. So if you know the Victor brakes, what I've basically done is taken a death wheel and slightly modified it. This would be like a permanent situation. There's no coming back from this. But I did do a lot of measurements beforehand. Moving my milk crate a little closer. I did a lot of measurements beforehand. The pad is the same width, within 1/10 of an inch. I believe the Vauxhall Victor is 1.5, and these are like 1.485 or something like that, or 1.49. Close enough to match. The face to the backing plate is why we ended up having to make some cast iron rings. And to space this rotor in and out the correct distance so it wouldn't bind in here, it required a bit of a spacer. Literally, I cut that out of 16 gauge sheet metal, and it will go between, or be sandwiched between the hub and the brake drum. You'll kind of see an idea here. Do this one-handed. Ka-chunk. If you, again, are aware with these, they go in there. I think I've got to line up the spacer 180 degrees. Let me just pause it for a second here. So, this is the Ford Focus brake. I made a spacer, 16 gauge sheet metal. Cut it with a death wheel. drilled out the holes, ground down the edges. This is required because this lip right here, the Ford Focus brakes will just slightly rub on this lip. You can see, if you look real close, you can see a little bit of marking or scoring there. So I had to space it out a little bit so it wouldn't rub right in here. This has already been cleaned up and repainted, and I've got the lubricant on it. And these go in a certain direction as well, so I've got a pen mark. So these small holes for retaining the drum match up. So we're gonna put this back together real quick. Just tacking it together. You can see how much space there is if you look real close. I mean, it's not all the way down, but you have to bevel the edge a bit to get it to fit inside the Ford Focus backing plate. But I think it'll be just fine. It's not like we're going to be driving this in the snow and the salt, I guess. Could you? I suppose you probably could. Not going to be a daily driver in my particular case here. It's like a classic car. I'll retain these down here. Of course, I've already repacked and re-greased the bearings. They were in fantastic shape. A testament again to it being a low kilometer or low mile car, if you prefer. It's in good shape. It needs to be tightened down a little bit, of course. It looks like it's a little bit crooked, but that's okay. So yeah, that's in a nutshell, going away from this, which are impossible to get parts from in North America, here in Canada. Funny, I got the rear wheel cylinders off of Amazon, but they're not officially Vauxhall Victor. They're a close enough match. I don't think they're Lockheed, but they're from a non-Vauxhall vehicle, which don't get hung up on the parts being Vauxhall Victor original parts, as long as it's got something that's close enough to work. Speaking of close enough to work, I don't know if I've covered this off or not. However, what we're looking at here, covering up the intake, this is a clutch master cylinder from, I believe, a Land Rover. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which one. Bolt pattern, of course, is different. So instead of it going sideways, I put a bolt-on plate, bent some new lines. Master cylinder from the brake is actually from the 80s Toyota Corolla or Tercel. And again, bent up new lines to match up with the holes. Some of them I just cut the end off, reflared it, and put a new fitting on. So this would be like an M10 by 1. And I believe that one is the same. And then taking the existing lines, leaving them alone so they have the Vauxhall fittings on the end to match up. I say this side here has already been done, so we'll go back over this part here. GM alternator, I can't remember what it's from, but it's from a front wheel drive one wire alternator, just the power. There is a second line here, I can find it here, which goes to the battery. This one right here, just focus it. That goes to the battery, so you can tell whether it's charging or not with a warning light. And this is actually just literally it's speaker wire. Running it down underneath, I think it's zip tied. Comes right up to again to the solenoid as factory. I did take out a ballast resistor. Well, this is because there was a leak. I disconnected one of the lines to try and tighten it up. There was a ballast resistor in line, which I'm used to in North American cars, and I didn't see anything in the manual about a ballast resistor, so I bypassed it. However, I think I am going to put it in line because it does have two lines to the coil, one from the start circuit, one from the run circuit. So this is mine, and I think I'm going to go and redo the ballast resistor. Speaking of this motor running, if anyone can see inside of there, there's an H. That H indicates a high compression head. I think it's about 0.4 of a percentage point higher than factory. This came stock on all North American cars or Canadian versions. You'll see in here 4 brand new spark plugs. The existing spark plugs, which came with the car, you can see them here. There are 3 different styles or types. I think there's AC Delco, different heat ranges, and this it's quite a bit longer reach. So part of the reason probably why when we did have it started and running and we were trying to tune it, was running on 3 cylinders. I have the dwell gauge out, I have the timing light out. It's been such a long time since I've set dwell on a distributor, which you can see here. I didn't realize that the wider the gap, the lower the dwell. The dwell should be between 0.35 and 0.37, and I couldn't get it better than 29. And even though I was opening up the gap into the points, it wasn't helping. I have to tighten them up to get a better dwell. Been a while since I've done that. Since I had the plugs out, I did do a compression test. The gloves are just there to cover the intake. Fantastic numbers across the board. 170 high compression head. Consistency as well, right across the board. So I'm happy to have that. I'm going to finish up the brake lines here today. I also found that one of these heater hoses was leaking. So these go into probably the heater, and I think I want to try and bypass this conundrum here. The least amount of connections, probably the better. So it looks like just standard 5/8 heater hose, but now I'm thinking about, I got to go inside the car and disconnect it. I think this is probably a part of the reason why this is the way it is, or there might have been an inline heater of some kind or a block heater. I don't see anything down here. Fuel pump, I rebuilt it with just parts that I had around here, some spare gasket material, cleaned it all up. You see, looking down there, there's the bleeder for the clutch. That one also rebuilt. Actually not rebuilt. If I'm not mistaken, I did buy a new one. And it wasn't quite the same, but it was close enough. It bolted up. The lines are hooked up to it, and we have clutch. And it works just fine. We actually, when we did have it running, not well, but running, we did have the chance to check the clutch. And it was working fine. It would engage and disengage the clutch, the transmission linkage, which I repaired. I'll have some photos of the repair job. I don't know whether I can splice those in here somewhere or not. However, drive line looks solid. I believe we got a bit of a valve cover leak, so I'm going to take that opportunity to remove it. Love the slotted screw head connectors of the day. But I remove the valve cover off and cut a new gasket. I have a bunch of cork, the nitrile impregnated cork as well. Let's cover this up here with my shadow. And use an opportunity to possibly set the gap on the valves. There is, it looks like, a vacuum port here. So I'm going to try and see if I can find a fitting that goes in. I can hook up a vacuum gauge right to the manifold, and I can maybe see what the vacuum is on the car and use that to set the carburetor up. Manual choke, so it's open right now. These 2 lines are from Toyota. Probably have a sensor, a brake level level sensor inside, which I'm not using. But other than that, oh yeah, that's your parking brake. It's got to be, I think you can get one of the help section at Canadian Tire to tighten that up. I'd like that to be a little bit less slack. In case you're wondering what this is here, back in the day, 4 fuses, 4 circuits, and that's it. So I have added inside of a gutted voltage regulator power circuits. You can sneak down underneath here or not and see, but it's the original one. But what I've done is I've turned it into a distribution block. So it's got power in, and then it distributes power from the block to where is necessary. So I basically bypassed it because it wasn't needed when we have the internally regulated alternator. I did do a slight modification because you might see here there's a bit of a clearance issue on the cooling fan on the alternator. When I first started up on the very first start, it was making a racket, and I had no idea what the hell that was. However, briefly figured out that that's what it was, so shut her down before any damage was done. Reworked a off the shelf, or I can't remember where I got the top alternator bracket. I'm going to sneak down there and see. This has been cut and re-welded. That's the factory Vauxhall alternator bracket. I'm going to sneak down there and you can see where reattached, welded it, cut it, welded it, reattached it to fit this. And that's the only circuit on there except for the water pump. So yeah, the belt is good. Motor turns over good. Once I got the new spark plugs in, it ran a lot better, but I still have some carb and covering the PVC. Some carb and timing to set up. Other than that, I don't know if you can sneak down there and see. Speaking of which, there's a little hole right there. Let's see if I can use a pointer down here. That hole right there, there's a ball that is embedded in the flywheel. Well, of course, this ball here is missing, but I did mark it with the paint marker. And that's how you set the timing on this guy. You actually have to look through, you have to really be a bit of a contortionist with your eyes to see through there to see that you're lined up with it. 9 degrees. And before top dead centers, they recommend a setting. They recommend you do not change it from that. So for now, that's a quick rundown on what's going on. And we'll go from here as far as moving forward on the brakes, seeing how they turn out. You can see in there, there's also new shocks all the way around. The rears were fantastic to do. They were very simple. They bled out really well. The fronts ultimately was my downfall, or our downfall, on the Great Beater Challenge. So let's go on from here.